Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. I'm your host, the OT Astartes, and welcome back to another edition of Astarties Analysis, and we are nearly halfway through Season 3 of Hetty Feather. And I ask you this question. What does a leaky roof, Sheila, Harriet and Hollywood all have in common? They're all falling out with each other. Especially in Disney Star Wars' case. But anywho, we are here to talk about... we're nearly midway through Series 3. Let us begin on Season 3, Episode 5. So, in today's journal entry, it is about winning a game. Time to play the game. Yeah, I had to think of Triple H when I heard the word time to play the game. Or if you prefer my time, that's okay too. In fact, I prefer my time anyway. So anywho, today's journal entry is about winning a game. Hetty asks herself whether she can truly succeed now that she's without her mother or a best friend to support her. Post-title sequence, the leak that was seen in the previous episode has gotten worse and has now affected the girls' dormitories. Nurse Macclesfield comes in with some buckets as it is near chaos. Sheila notices that it has been 3 days since Hetty and Harriet last spoke to one another. She wedges in by changing Harriet's bed for her and telling her that she's not a baby for wanting to go to New York and maybe others wouldn't understand if they were her real friends, as she says that directly to Hetty. Hetty, however, tells her to be quiet. Everybody is told to go to laundry apart from Hetty, who will be on kitchen duties. Oh, even though there's a leak in the room, that don't stop you from coming to Cook Jenkins's kitchen duties. Sheila also has been given the day off as well. Oh, Sheila, you've worked so hard, you deserve a day off. She pridefully leads Harriet away. Constable Clark is popping in to see Nurse Winterson after the storm that had endured the previous night. He also asks out Nurse Winterson for a stroll in the evening. Vince and Judd stroll around the corner and see that Constable Clark is giving Nurse Winterson a gift. He leaves. Nurse Winterson pretends that nothing has happened, and Cranbourne comes in. Vince says that they need more buckets and that she was just handing them the key to the storeroom. Winterson hands Vince the key as well as the pin that Constable Clark had given her. They go off and Cranbourne asks that she oversees the clean-up operation as he has important business to attend to. Meanwhile, Cook Jenkins briefs Hetty on the main objective of the day. She needs to move the poorly produced flour that made everyone ill last episode, as well as move the new shipments of flour in. And there is also the other kitchen duties of the day. So Hetty thinks that this is going to be impossible. Oh, but Cook Jenkins tells her to get your head down and there'll be something in for you later. Oh, well, there certainly is, my gal. You need to work hard, and there's the pleasure of hard work. Now we go to Matron Bottomley's office. So Nurse Macclesfield gives her the bill for her passage to New York. She talks about America, and Nurse Macclesfield says that London isn't all that bad. But they then hear a child singing. Matron then investigates, but however it is a visitor called Dr. Bridges and his daughter Annabelle. She is ecstatic about meeting the foundlings and they are taken on a tour. I believe that we also have a reveal of Nurse Macclesfield's first name being Mabel. Back to Hetty, she carries the sack of poisoned flour out and Cranbourne spots her struggling. He offers to send one of the boys to help her out, but when Cook Jenkins says that Hetty's she's all right on her own, I used to pull these things up hills. Hey, up! You southerners, you have it easy. Us northerners, we had to work, you know. Anywho, Hetty's quite all right now. Hetty blurts out and says that this is ridiculous and pretends to feel dizzy. And Cranbourne then goes off to find somebody with a lot of dissatisfaction from Cook Jenkins. Oh, she don't need any help, that Hetty. She can work herself out. And if she's knackered, she's knackered. She can make herself a bloody cup of tea. Dr. Bridges is being shown around and Annabelle asks where the foundlings are. She wants to play with them and Nurse Macclesfield offers to occupy her time, but she is called an old lady by Annabelle. Matron compromises by saying that a few older foundlings can have an extended recreation period and tells Nurse Macclesfield to book a room out and fetch a box. So this box basically contains lots of children's games for the time, like dominoes and all sorts. In the hall, the clean-up operation is well underway, and now that Vince has Nurse Macclesfield's pin, he can use it to get whatever he wants. Cranbourne asks for volunteers to help in the kitchen, and Vince immediately raises his hand with the pin to demonstrate his power. He is chosen and walks past Nurse Winterston with a hint of swagger. Nurse Macclesfield carries a huge box down from the corridor that is full of card games, as we said earlier. She trips over a bucket, however, and spills the games all over the floor. Vince comes across the obstacle and he is told to shoo as he goes to the kitchen. Hetty sips some tea and recalls a letter that Ida had sent to her, and Sheila is drinking some lemonade. Oh, you don't need that, Sheila, with all due respect. You need to have some good old tea. Hetty then asks Cook if she misses Ida, and Cook says that she were a good egg. Oh, Ida was a good egg. Shame she had to leave for the Iron Islands, though. Apparently she had some family business to take care of. Some bloke in a castle, I don't know what all that's about, but anywho. Hetty tells Cook that she feels alone now that she's fallen out with her friends. Vince, however, makes an entrance mocking Hetty, and she strops off. Vince is told to take them empty crates out and stay out of Hetty's way. On a street, Mrs. Smith asks the driver whether everything is going according to plan. He confirms that the delivery will arrive at the arranged time. Mrs. Smith says that there is a lot of stake and he must only deal with Hetty Feather. Harriet, Sheila and Elizabeth are waiting in the classroom. Harriet asks whether they are in trouble. That is until Annabel bursts in, excitedly exclaiming her arrival. Hetty carries some flour back into the pantry and drops the bag. Vince comes in and carries on. Hetty says that out of all the boys, they chose him. He tells her to be quiet and he helps clean up the mess. He asks why girls always sulk, and Hetty says that he doesn't understand because he doesn't have feelings. Vince tells her that sulking won't solve anything or get her friends back. He also tells her to try and not be miserable for 5 minutes. He tries to cheer her up by drawing a noughts and crosses board with the flour. Meanwhile, Nurse Macclesfield is reading a book. And also back to Annabel. Annabel is happy to be playing with the foundlings, but only Elizabeth is spending time with her. Sheila is less enthusiastic by saying that she's just like anybody else. Harriet, however, disagrees and says that they spend their day trapped in one building without ever seeing the outside world, and asks how someone can go to America when all they've ever known is the Foundling Hospital. Sheila points out that America can be savage. Harriet tells her that she's never seen the ocean, let alone crossed it. Sheila asks whether it's really that bad leaving the hospital. Sheila points out that she's got a position in the kitchen, and Elizabeth may as well. Harriet questions whether there's more out there and that she may be scared. Sheila then asks if she will end up in a horrible place all alone. So, things turn around for Hetty and Vince, where they are continuing to play tic-tac-toe. Vince wins by gloating that he never loses, and calls her a sore loser like his borrowed brother. Hetty asks if he misses his borrowed brother, and he shrugs his shoulders. She then asks about his mother, and tells her that he never got to meet them. They also have another game as well. Dr. Bridges tells Matron that he has a few ideas to modernise the hospital. Cranbourne then comes along and leaves them alone. He says that the roof is in danger of collapsing and he has estimated the costs and wishes to have a fundraiser. Matron Bottomley, after a bit of denial, comes around and agrees to help. Back to Hetty and Vince's tic-tac-toe game. It ends in a draw and Hetty feels much better mentally and she decides to go back to work. Vince describes a domino to Hetty as he is unaware of the name and how to play the game of dominoes. She says that her and Jem used to play for days on end and she offers to teach him how to play the game. Life is the name of the game, and I want to play the game with you. However, before anything can happen, they hear Cook Jenkins coming, and they try and get rid of the flour to erase the tic-tac-toe board. But they accidentally touch hands when Cook Jenkins comes in. Cook Jenkins then sends Vince away, and she is asked whether she believes in second chances. She responds by saying that he'd stay out of her way if he knew what were good for him. Oh, I tell ya. Now, back to Elizabeth and Annabelle. Elizabeth is pulling the coin behind the ear trick on Annabelle. Annabelle calls her fun, and she tells her that her father needs a new children's maid. Sheila and Harriet overhear the conversation. Sheila goes over to her friend and whispers in her ear that she wouldn't want that, but Elizabeth turns back to Annabelle so that she can tell her more. Sheila then slams the games box onto the table in rage. Vince gives Judd a piece of bread that he stole from Cook Jenkins. Oh, stealing from my kitchen. Oh, I shan't have that. Honestly, that Vince, he's nothing but trouble. Judd asks whether he would want to get Nurse Winterson into trouble. But Vince is still on his high horse when Nurse Winterson comes out to tell him that there is something in the shed. Vince goes off and tells Judd that if he needs anything, then Nurse Winterson is the one to ask. Cook Jenkins reports that a special delivery is on its way, and she tells Hetty to go get some rest. Hetty then asks what it could be, and Cook Jenkins answers by saying that it's a special egg delivery. Hetty then goes, but she is then dragged off by Vince, who has a surprise for her. We go now to the governor's meeting, where Dr. Bridges and the governors are having a meeting. Mrs. Smith references the outbreak of sickness, but Matron Bottomley interrupts by saying that there was a problem with the supplier. She continues to talk about Cranbourne's surveying, but Mrs. Smith carries on her points, talking about how the foundling's health is more important at this moment. Brigwell, however, presumes that Matron Bottomley has sorted this problem out and goes back to the roof leaking, which makes Mrs. Smith glare at Matron. Vince covers Hetty's eyes as he takes her to a shed. He uncovers her eyes to show that there is a game of dominoes to be played while they wait. Outside, Judd tears up the bread and runs over to Matthias, Ned and Walter. He says that he's not a bad friend and he doesn't want to get Nurse Winterson into trouble. Matthias tells him to slow down and to start from the beginning. Meanwhile, Nurse Macclesfield is emotional at the end of her book. She then goes out to check on how Annabelle is doing with Harriet, Elizabeth and Sheila. Meanwhile, Annabelle says that she is bored and wants to soak Nurse Macclesfield. Harriet, however, interjects and says that it's not a good idea and is backed up by Elizabeth. Annabelle wants to do it by herself, and everybody looks at Sheila, who shrugs her shoulders. Vince and Hetty are playing dominoes as he is getting used to the rules when Matthias bursts in and grabs his uniform to pin him. Matthias says that Vince is blackmailing Nurse Winterson with her silver pin. Vince denies this, but is ordered to empty his pockets. Hetty tells Matthias to leave Vince alone and he goes out. So the egg delivery arrives, and the delivery man is waiting for Hetty. It's a shame it's not Stanley. Can I just point out? We need to see... We could have brought back Stanley at this point. Stanley! And he drove the fastest milk cart in London. The delivery man reassures somebody who is hiding in the carriage that he'll be back soon. That somebody is Ida Battersea, without the assistance of the rest of House Greyjoy. The delivery driver goes into the kitchen to inform Cook Jenkins that Hetty hasn't turned up. She tells him to stay for a few more minutes. Now we go back to the governor's meeting. Matron says that Cranbourne will be overseeing the refurbishment operation. Mrs. Smith is happy to help with the money, and she says that a task of that size shouldn't have to be controlled by very few people. Colonel Brigwell suggests that they could see the destruction firsthand, and they get up to leave when Mrs. Smith says that they should wait for a while. But Matron Bottomley ignores her and everybody leaves the meeting. Meanwhile, Annabelle is getting up onto the chair and asks Elizabeth to pass her the bucket. She refuses to do so and is called dull. Annabelle carries on and Elizabeth threatens to drag her down. Annabelle escalates the situation by calling Elizabeth a scaredy cat multiple times. Elizabeth helps her down by the hand and she gets up to get the bucket. Annabelle closes the door and spills the bucket all over herself, and she cries when Nurse Macclesfield comes in. Nurse Macclesfield then tells everyone to remain where they are. Now, back to Vince and Hetty. Vince and Hetty are carrying on their game of dominoes. Hetty says that if Matthias was telling the truth, then she would give him a chance. But Vince argues that Matthias was lying, and then Hetty tells Vince to do the right thing. Vince gets up and gets Nurse Macclesfield's pin from his back pocket, but he doesn't have it. Hetty walks out by saying that they could have been friends. Hetty then spots an egg on the floor. Vince tells her that he took the delivery, but Hetty says that it was meant to be for her. She asks questions about the eggs when she realises that Ida is the delivery, as she remembers Cook Jenkins saying that Ida was a good egg. She rushes off to see the carriage and nearly get away. Hetty manages to get inside of the carriage to reunite with her mother, and Ida says that Mrs. Smith had found her and told her about Hetty sacrificing the job opportunity to Blanche. She also tells her that she'll be waiting for her when she leaves the hospital. Now, this is nearly compromised, where the governors go outside to survey the roof damage. Mrs. Smith notices that the carriage has gone, but Matron then goes off on her own. Back to the carriage now. Ida tells Hetty that she should behave or she will be sent far away from here. Hetty tells her mother that she messed up and she's lost her friends. Ida tells Hetty that she needs her friends and that she can't do this alone. Mrs. Smith then catches up with Matron, but she carries on and eventually spots the carriage. Mrs. Smith tells her to leave them alone for a bit, and she refers to Ida being thrown out of the hospital. She then resigns on the condition that Hetty doesn't come to harm, and in exchange, Matron tells Mrs. Smith to not come to the hospital ever again. Hetty and Ida then part ways once again, and Mrs. Smith comes to collect her. Matron checks in with Elizabeth, Annabelle, Sheila and Harriet and says that she will punish Elizabeth. Elizabeth says that Annabelle was going to hurt herself and is backed up by Macclesfield. Dr. Bridges tells Matron that no punishment is required and praises Elizabeth. He also states that she would be a good children's maid. Sheila, however, objects as they all leave. Dr. Bridges tells Matron that no punishment is needed and praises Elizabeth. He also says that she will be a good children's maid, but Sheila objects to this as they all leave. Hetty thanks Mrs. Smith, and Cook Jenkins remarks that they wouldn't be in this trouble if Hetty hadn't have waited. Now into kitchen. So Hetty thanks Mrs. Smith and Cook Jenkins remarks that they wouldn't be in this trouble if Hetty had have waited. This prompts Mrs. Smith to inform Hetty of her resignation. She also tells Hetty to keep on writing as she says goodbye. Vince then comes in and Hetty blames him for Mrs. Smith leaving. Vince says that he would never have got Nurse Winston into trouble and he gives her the pin. Hetty tells them that he lost the game and she goes back to the dormitories. She then hugs Harriet and they both apologise to one another. Harriet has decided that she will go to America and says that Elizabeth showed her that you have to be brave to be rewarded and that she doesn't want to be part of the she-mob. Sheila is sitting on her bed and feels a few drops of water on her hand. Can I also just point out, something that I observed in this scene is the way that Sheila was sitting on the bed and she was looking up to the roof as all the water was pouring onto her hand. From my point of view, it kind of looked as though she was thinking of Monica at that moment. So the water would kind of represent Monica's tears because of what happened with her. And of course, at this moment, Sheila feeling lonely would make her think of Monica. We end the episode with Mrs. Smith departing and Matron standing through the doorway staring at her. And at the end, we end with Matron looking at a list. Series 3, Episode 6. In the morning, everybody's waking up. Later on, when everyone's ready to go and do some chores, Nurse Macclesfield comments on Hetty's boots being dirty. Hetty wonders what had happened to Nurse Macclesfield before she got her job as a nurse. Outside, the boys are doing their morning drill and preparing for a military display that they will be doing for the public. Matthias bumps into Ned and everybody laughs, apart from Cranbourne, who tells him off. Hetty is then ushered along by Nurse Winterson and wonders if growing up means forgetting to have any fun. In this scene, Nurse Winterson is a bit more grouchier than usual. This is after Constable Clark broke her heart. Post-title sequence, the boys are constructing a cannon and Vince is in charge. Oh, good. Matthias will love that, won't he? Judd falls off 2 planks of wood. Gideon and Walter bring the entire thing down with the weight of a wheel, and almost crushes Judd's ankle. Colonel Brigwell comes up to them with an army officer by his side. The officer orders all the boys to fall in, and Matron comments by saying that there are a lot of people coming to watch the military display, and she does not expect them to see them disappointed. The officer orders them to fall in, but he does it a second time, this time shouting his head off. Meanwhile, the girls are cleaning the floor. After their falling out in the last episode, Elizabeth goes up to Sheila and says that they cannot part ways as enemies. Sheila asks whether she would still visit, and Elizabeth assures her that she will, but Sheila is still cold towards her. This is when Winterson comes up to remind her to work even though she will still be leaving the next day. This very much surprises Elizabeth after, in the last episode, she was offered the job as a children's maid. Harriet is concerned about Nurse Winterson and she tells Hetty that they have to do something to cheer her up. They plan to get Constable Clark back in by making something go missing. In Matron's office, Colonel Brigwell hands some money to Matron Bottomley to help with the roof repairs. Sheila comes in with the tea tray and Hetty comes in with the Victoria sponge cake. Matron and Brigwell banter a bit about old people and he picks up a painting. Colonel Brigwell sees that it is valuable and he offers to hang it up, but Matron is most dismayed. So back outside, the boys are stalling. Ned, Walter, Matthias and Gideon are rebuilding a cannon, and Matthias talks about going to America. Matthias's friends offer to look out for him, and they joke about the army being a sort of family. Vince and Judd are struggling to get the other parts of the cannon over. Vince asks whether Gideon has got the bolts in order to connect the parts together, and Gideon says that he has forgotten them. Vince goes and calls him a stupid idiot, man! And Walter stands up to Vince and defends his friend. But the argument, however, escalates. At that moment, the officer stops them and orders Gideon to get the bolts. Judd then drops the wheel and the sergeant's hands start to shake, and he then falls on the floor. There is a pause which prompts Cranbourne to send the boys off to lunch. Now we got to kitchen and Cook Jenkins is telling the girls to hurry up with the cooking because we got a lot of people to feed today. Oh, I haven't seen an event this big since season 1. Meanwhile, Harriet is dawdling and writing a letter to Matthias. Oh God, another love letter. Oh, whatever shall I do? The letter will tell Matthias to meet up with her in the evening. Hetty is about to help her write it down in poetry when Ned comes in. Cook tells him to take up the food trays, and then while she has the chance, Harriet calls him over and asks to give Matthias the letter that she has written. After noticing that Nurse Winterson is getting worse, they decide to execute their plan. In the corridor, the sergeant is lurking around. He then goes into the governor's meeting room and looks at a sheet, then at the painting that Brigwell has put up. Hetty and Harriet then sneak around as well on the outside of the room and avoid getting spotted. Harriet urges Hetty not to steal a painting, but Hetty insists that they are hiding, said with commas, and they go in to get the painting. Harriet implies to Hetty that she hasn't thought this plan through, but despite that, she carries on. Matron Bottomley is then going off somewhere while briefing Nurse Winterson. When they are gone, the sergeant then turns up and continues to explore until he finds the records room. Matron Bottomley then goes into the meeting room and notices that the painting has gone. Outside, Ned gives Matthias Harriet's letter. Cranbourne orders the boys to take apart the cannon now that they have assembled it. The sergeant then takes Walter away for a private word. He commends him for standing up for his friends, but warns that he should choose his battles wisely. The sergeant asks what his friends think of him. Walter doesn't answer. He is asked again whether he wants to join the army, and then he's told to answer his question. Walter says that he thinks that the sergeant isn't a real soldier because he's afraid. The sergeant takes his cap off and reveals that he has had shrapnel inside of his head, and therefore he cannot fight in any battles. He was brought back home by Brigwell, and he tells Walter that if he wants to survive, he needs to keep his head down, and he is dismissed. However, he calls him back and addresses him as son. Meanwhile, Matron Bottomley assembles the nurses and Cranbourne to report the theft. Cranbourne recommends a search, but Matron refuses to do so. She spots Hetty and she carries on. Nurse Macclesfield recommends to send in the constable and everybody is dismissed. Hetty then walks off, knowing that her plan is working. Outside, while the other boys roll around the cannon, the sergeant talks to Walter about giving him up. He says that the Foundling Hospital wouldn't speak to him, and he explains to Walter that his mother died in childbirth. Walter denies that he even has a father and is told that he has a family. Walter walks away and is in shock at what he has just heard. Hetty goes into the laundry room and hides the painting. Not long after she is gone, Sheila comes in. Ned spots Constable Clark and Cranbourne tells him that apparently there has been a theft. Ned goes to Matthias and he bets that he can solve it before Constable Clark can. So he fakes an injury and he sets off to try and solve the mystery. Nurse Macclesfield is taking Constable Clark to Matron's office. He explains a bit about policing being about more than just wrestling crooks. Hetty approaches and describes that she's heard noises coming from the chapel, and so Constable Clark goes off to investigate with much concern from Nurse Macclesfield. In the chapel, Constable Clark runs into Nurse Winterson while Hetty and Harriet sneak up above to overhear the proceedings. He apologises and states that he was wrong, but Nurse Winterson says that she was the fool. Hetty and Harriet smile at their possible victory. Meanwhile, Ned goes to the scene of the crime and looks around. He jots down notes and then runs back to join the others. Outside, though, Nurse Macclesfield stops him and Ned claims that he knows who stole the painting. Back in the chapel while being observed from a distance, Constable Clark and Nurse Winterson discuss love. Clark offers out his hands, but Winterson refuses and says that this would cost her job. Constable Clark keeps trying to convince her to do anything, but she tells him to go. They promise to see each other again, and Constable Clark kisses her hand. Nurse Macclesfield comes in. But she loiters around, observing Constable Clark kissing Winterson's hand. But overcome with emotion, she runs off, and after that, Constable Clark leaves. Outside, the boys have just finished practicing for their cannon drill. Gideon tries to convince Walter to go and talk to his father. Meanwhile, the sergeant is also talking to Matthias and tells him that he would be a credit to his regiment. He shakes this off and says that he will be in America instead. When he is questioned about this, Matthias comes out with self-confident answers and is told that the army is for him. After that, Walter comes over to have a chat with the sergeant. Now we cut to Matron Bottomley's office and Nurse Macclesfield comes in to tell Matron about the possible thief. Meanwhile, Walter's father talks to him about his family. He says that on his grandfather on his mother's side is a brigadier, and on his side there is nothing. He describes how he fell in love with his mother and joined the army to protect her until she died. When he heard about Walter, he went to search for him. His father is about to take him away until Matron Bottomley comes out and accuses him of stealing the painting. He is arrested until Cranbourne intervenes, but Matron Bottomley carries on. Vince then goes up behind Walter and then taunts him. Gideon tries to talk to him, but Walter ignores his friend. Elizabeth takes the tea tray into the kitchen and attempts to resolve her problems with Sheila. Sheila is still reluctant to make up with her, and Elizabeth says that foundlings aren't picked out to become nurses or matrons. Sheila walks off and asks Matron Bottomley to inquire about becoming a nurse, but Matron calls this ridiculous and tells her to keep her ambitions realistic. She then starts to ask if she can help and starts to talk about the stolen painting, but then she stops and walks away. That night, Hetty and Harriet talk about the sergeant going to prison. Harriet is told to go and see Matthias while Hetty puts the painting back. In the boys' dormitories, Matthias is reading Harriet's letter and Ned says that he will cover for him, but Matthias says that he's not going, so he scrunches up the letter and decides to give up altogether. Meanwhile, Gideon is talking to Walter about his father. He doesn't know what to think of the sergeant being the thief, and Gideon starts to talk about being alone. Harriet then goes up to the tower. She calls out for Matthias, but is met with Ned. Meanwhile, Hetty is searching for the painting that she hid, and she is unable to find it in the laundry room. The next morning, Hetty and Harriet vent about their woes. Sheila walks up to them and tells them that it's all been sorted. Colonel Brigwell, however, is ranting at Matron about the sergeant getting thrown in prison. Matron explains that the sergeant is a thief, but when she talks about the painting, she sees that it has been returned. A bit later, the visitors arrive for the military parade. Hetty serves the tea trays while the boys march out. The sergeant seems to have been released from prison very quickly, and Cranbourne is told to listen and learn by Colonel Brigwell. Meanwhile, Nurse Macclesfield goes up to Matron to tell her that she wants to go to America with her. However, those hopes are all put to rest as Matron Bottomley says that there may not be room for her. Hetty thanks Sheila for getting the painting back, but Sheila says that she didn't do it for her. Harriet then comes along and says that Sheila's only got herself to blame. Sheila then walks inside and Harriet asks Hetty whether she has seen Matthias about. Hetty says that Matthias is in the yard putting something away, and so we cut to Matthias wandering around. Harriet then catches up with him and they start to talk. Matthias is doubting the promise that Harriet had made and is convinced that he belongs in the army. He tells her to find somebody and raise a family as he gets a box. Harriet, however, pleads for him to not give up on her, and she is determined that they will find a way. However, it is looking bleak for the two of them. They both part ways and kiss one another on the cheeks. Also, Elizabeth is leaving, but Sheila runs over to talk to her. Sheila says that she's got nobody, but Elizabeth reassures her that she's always got her. Sheila begs her friend not to forget about her, but Elizabeth says, how could I? She tells her to find a way out and then find her. So they both hug and Elizabeth is then carted off. Now the military display is about to begin. The sergeant tells Ned that he is smart and that the army could use him for his brains. The sergeant then goes off to talk with Walter, and he says that he's got a family, and Walter promises that his father that he will be brave. He now knows that he is somebody. Just then, Cranbourne orders the boys to go to their posts, and the parade begins. Sheila is sitting in the kitchen crying. At this moment, Hetty arrives to comfort her. They both laugh about the look on Matron Bottomley's face when the painting was returned. We end the episode with the military parade being underway and Hetty is talking about having fun and being grumpy. So I've just had a thought about the leaks being linked up to the friendships. So when in a scene in one of the episodes, we see Sheila sitting on the bed and the water is pouring into the girls' dormitories. It's at that point when her and Elizabeth have well and truly fallen out. And also this is Elizabeth's final 2 episodes. I think we get to see a softer side to Elizabeth. I think she was the softer one in the she-mob, whereas Monica wasn't the most intelligent one in the she-mob, and Sheila was, of course, the leader. But Elizabeth was the kind and soft one, as she was perhaps the only one bothered to play with Annabelle and entertain her. And you could see that she was very patient with her. Firm but fair, as Nurse Macclesfield described it. And I think this is the episode which makes you see Elizabeth in a completely different light. Because her character has come quite a long way from being Sheila's best friend or one of Sheila's minions, if you will, to a character who is perhaps the softest of the she-mob. And I think that Monica's death had an effect on her like that because, as I've said, we see her asking if they would have a funeral for Monica. And I think that from that episode onwards, she starts to change. In episode 5, she's... oh, I've got my position. I'll be all right. I'll be fine. I'll be helping out with Cook Jenkins. But in the 6th episode, when she asks about helping out, also, I like the backwards and forwards conversation that her and Harriet had in that episode as well. We've also got the Harriet subplot of her going to New York and obviously Matron Bottomley wanting to go to New York as well. And then, sadly for Matthias, his dreams of going with her are also put on hold. Because I think in the 6th episode, he starts to think, maybe I will be in the army after all. Also with Walter finding his father, I don't get how he'd be released from prison that quickly. I mean, you'd have to go through a lot of paperwork to do so. I don't know how the legal system works, folks. Now, as for Vince and Hetty, I think that this is a sort of redemption arc for Vince because he starts to grow a bit closer to Hetty as the more time they spend with one another, the more games that they play. And even though, yes, in the episode, Vince did steal away Nurse Winterston's gift from Constable Clark, and at the end of the episode, it's because of Vince that Nurse Winterson had to give him his pin back and say, I can't do this, because I believe that Nurse Winterson was terrified of what Vince would do. And it just shows that he can be a manipulative bully. And even Judd thinks that, you know, while he's off with Hetty, Judd goes up to Matthias and co, and he tells him, I'm not a bad friend, but I don't like how they let Miss Smith go after a short time, because she was to be an extra governor in Lady Asquith's absence. But Matron kind of told her, look, if you don't interrupt, I won't do anything to Hetty. And she started out as someone quite promising, someone who'd be on Hetty's side in the early episodes of the season, but later on, she still is loyal to Hetty. And she sticks up for her, but at the end she has to leave because of what has happened with Matron Bottomley, and of course smuggling Ida in to see Hetty. That was a really risky move. But one question I have is, how in the name of bloody hell did Cook Jenkins know about Ida Battersea coming back? How the hell did she do that, unless she's had some secret form of communication, or with some letter, or she just might have had a cup of tea with her. You never know. It's Cook Jenkins, and Cook Jenkins loves a food and a tea. Oh, I love a good cup of tea, me. She'll show that southerner that Yorkshire tea is the best. Mark my words. And I also like how I get to do a Cook Jenkins impression every time she comes on, which is nearly every other scene. I think Hetty stealing the painting was just a bit messed up. Like, wouldn't she have learnt her lesson by now? If she wanted to get Nurse Winterson and Constable Clark back together, they could have done something else. But at least Sheila managed to fix it in the end. Must have been the influence of Elizabeth. I also think that, other than Nurse Macclesfield getting over emotional about a book, I also love how we get a bit more of Detective Ned here when he searches for whoever stole the painting and is determined to solve the mystery of who stole the painting before Constable Clark can. I think that's a bit of nice competition between the two. As for the scene with Hetty and Sheila in the kitchen at the end of the 6th episode, I think that this is one of those rare moments where Hetty and Sheila comfort one another. This happened for a short time in an episode of season 1 when a kid faints and Hetty is panicking about what to do. And Sheila helps out. I think in this episode, it's Hetty's turn to try and look after Sheila. Returning the favour, if you will. And this is one of those scenes that shows that Hetty and Sheila don't really hate each other. I also love that Harriet quote when she says, you have to be brave to be rewarded, and that is so true. This has also been echoed in a song. It was by the singer Owl City in his 2018 album Cinematic, and his song, that song is called Be Brave. So definitely check it out. If you want a good cry, listen. So definitely check it out. It's definitely a good song to listen to. And it's about being brave and how... And he actually explained in a behind-the-scenes type thing or behind the song, he explained that bravery can... So he said that you never know what could happen if you do something as everyday. So it's a great song. It's about how he met his wife, and it's beautiful in every way. I'll never stop listening to Owl City, but that's another story. So before we go, I'd like to say sorry that this is a bit late. So yeah, I'd like to thank you all very much for watching this video, and I'll see you all later. So goodbye, good night, and follow the buzzards.